sandy berms. So in terms of methods, what I learned was, it's important that aerial reconnaissance isn't just enough. You really have to identify them on the ground, in person. And so in 2009, I later mapped the Shingle Point site here with the Laxton First Nation with a total station instrument. This site is about 900 meters in length, almost a kilometer. It's between 10 and 55 meters in width. It's an absolutely massive site. I don't know if you can see in the background there, it's hard to get a scale on things, but Stuart Thomas from the Laxton First Nation is holding the survey rod. He's in red right at the back. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to walk this beach. It's the size of nearly 5 football fields. It's an incredibly large site and very impressive. But once you seem to learn, you sort of begin to see these features, I began to discover many other very large clam gardens that hadn't been noted in previous report. In 2008, I discovered this clam garden on the south end of Gabriel Island. It's about 3 blocks from my house, but it measures a massive 1.5 kilometers in length. And I realized that those low tide surveys that had been done in the past had been on a certain tide, about a half a meter tide to 0.3, and most of the clam gardens I've discovered in the Gulf Islands are between 0.3 and a 0 tide. So it's quite a low tide. They're almost submerged. And it's usually typically in May and June when you can see these. The Gulf Islands is a region of rising sea levels of the past 5,000 years. And this isn't the case in other parts of the coast, such as the Broughton Archipelago or Quadra Island, where I understand that clam gardens can be viewed at much higher sort of elevation. But even that just very slight difference, that 20 centimeters explains why we haven't really seen a lot of these clam gardens before. They just can't be seen except for a very specific time. And you really have to look at a low tide of between 0.1 and 0 tide to find those. And it's in the Gulf Islands about 6 days of the year where you can actually survey for these. It's typically 2 hours a day, 1 hour on either side of that 0 tide. So, it's 12 hours out of the whole year that you can actually see these features. And today, sort of this year was a 17-year tidal fluctuation where you really couldn't see any of these features in the Gulf Islands. There's just too high a tide. So I learned that you have to be quite fast when you're doing these types of... One way is to have a really fast boat, but that's not often possible. I developed a 3-part methodology. One was, certainly by boat is helpful, but it's quite slow, and it's very hard to see them often from the water outside that 2-hour window. So the next step was to begin chartering a float plane, and fortunately I had access to a float plane on in Ladysmith Harbor there that we spent about 6 hours over 3 years trying to identify these clam gardens by air. And unlike those helicopter surveys, which are pretty expensive, float planes quite reasonable. They go nice and slow, and you can identify things quite well.